Thanks for staying with us. Time now for Africa News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, several political detainees have been freed by Juba and handed over to Kenya. The release of the 7 are a partial concession by South Sudan to rebels' demands. This as peace negotiations continue in Addis Ababa. Also, as Central African Republic's troubles are discussed by the African Union's Peace and Security Council in Ethiopia, refugees continue to flee into religious violence in the country itself, many heading into neighbouring Democratic Republic of Congo. And we also head to Togo, where Islam is the minority religion, but there are growing concerns amongst imams of a rise in extremism. First up, South Sudan's partially met a demand made by rebels with whom they're still thrashing out a peace agreement in talks in Addis Ababa. 7 of 11 political supporters of former Vice President Riek Machar, including former Justice Minister John Lok Jok, have been released from prison in Juba and handed over to Kenyan authorities. 4 are still in custody, but the move's raised hopes for the negotiations. Fighting's eased off, but not completely stopped since last Friday's ceasefire. There were fears that battling that began in December could erupt into civil war. Well, Hannah McNeish tells us now more about the prisoners' release.
The prisoners have been released during these regionally mediated talks in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, but also due to considerable international pressure, namely by the South Sudan's maybe largest ally and biggest donor, the US. But there are conflicting reports over what this means, over whether these men are actually free. There are only 7 out of 11 that have been freed, and there are various conflicting sources over whether they will actually be kept in prison in Kenya or whether they will be returned eventually to South Sudan to face treason charges, or whether they will be able to speak at all.
Now, Hannah, what about the 4 that are still in custody in Juba?
Well, the 4 that are in custody are actually, what I'd say, the most important. 2 of them are extremely important in terms of negotiations. One of them was the lead negotiator for quite some time with Sudan and was the sacked head of the ruling party. They hold considerable political sway. And 2 of them are leading figures that belong to the country's largest ethnic group that have a lot of influence over the military. So their non-release will not please the rebels who have demanded that everybody is freed and can take part in talks to end this violence.
And for those who have actually been let out, the 7 who are now in Kenya, does this mean that the group will now have a chance to play a part in negotiations going forward in Addis Ababa?
It doesn't seem so. I mean, South Sudan is saying that they will be kept in prison in Kenya. Kenya is saying that they are political. They've received political asylum. A security expert that I spoke to earlier said he thinks that their release has been negotiated on the basis that they won't talk to anyone. They will be impartial, and they may not be detained in prison, but they will definitely be supervised.
Hannah McNeish there for us from Nairobi. To Addis Ababa now, where top African ministers are meeting ahead of tomorrow's opening of the African Union Summit, and South Sudan's crisis will be central to that agenda. Talks have already started, and what's to be done to regionally react to the violence in South Sudan and Central African Republic are being tackled. Our Duncan Woodside's in the Ethiopian capital for us.
The African Union's Peace and Security Council today convened here in Addis Ababa, with the situation in the Central African Republic topping the agenda. This comes a day after the UN Security Council approved the deployment of a European Union force to that country. Now, the European troops will work alongside an existing African-led force there, and one of the troop contributing countries to the African force is, of course, Chad, and Chad's President Idris Deby spoke to us shortly after addressing delegates here.
The situation in the Central African Republic is not good at all. Despite all the efforts that have been deployed, it's important to catch the attention of the international community through the AU's Peace and Security Council, because we have important decisions to make on this topic, based on the real situation on the ground, which is deteriorating day by day in all senses, political, security and humanitarian.
politique, sécuritaire, humanitaire.
Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has called on donors to increase funding for the peacekeeping efforts in Central African Republic. A donors meeting will in fact convene here in Addis Ababa on Saturday with a view to cranking up assistance to the African-led mission there.
Meanwhile, the violence continues in Central African Republic. French forces fired warning shots on Wednesday as 2 Muslim men were hacked to death by machetes on the streets of Bangui. Refugees are still fleeing the bloodshed, many crossing the Ubangi River into Democratic Republic of Congo to stay with friends or family there. Mehdi Medeb sent us this report from Zongo.
A family reunited. 3 weeks ago, Sylvain took his loved ones away from the violence in the Central African Republic and brought them here to Congo. They stayed with a cousin of his. Only Sylvain and his eldest son still live in Bangui.
I'm very happy to see her again. I wasn't expecting it. God wanted this to happen, wanted me to see my family that I'd left beforehand. I didn't know exactly where they were. When she got here, she called me. I came here once, then came here another time to find her.
Vivian is hosting and feeding 7 of her cousins. It's not easy, but she says it's the right thing to do. A few years ago, she was the one who had to flee her home.
There's war in their country, so we have to receive them here. That's normal. We greet our brothers. It's hard to welcome them because we don't have enough food, but we find ways. The situation in Bangui worries us because they're our brothers, and what happens there can happen to us. But then we would flee to their country, and they would welcome us.
Living conditions are basic, but at least here in Zongo, they have found what they could no longer have in Bangui.
We don't hear the sound of weapons here. Here, we live in peace. We are safe. We wait for peace to return in our country. Then we will go back.
The family prays for peace to return. Once again, it's time for Sylvain, his son, to head back to Bangui to make sure their house has not been looted. They cross the Ubangi River, hoping to see their family soon.
That report sent to us by Mehdi Medeb. We're going to head to Togo now, and the country is mainly animist and Christian. About 20% of the population, though, is Muslim. There's been a rise in Wahhabi Islam, which is a strict form of the religion. Togo's imams are increasingly warning of the dangers of extremism. A former security minister has also spoken out about worrying signs of a possible growing jihadist threat. Emmanuel Soji sent us this report.
Seeing women wearing the niqab has become more commonplace in Togo. That is put down to the arrival of immigrants from Mali, Niger and Nigeria, and to the growing popularity of going to Arab countries to study.
Many students come back here and then promote Islam. They transmit to us all that they've learned in other countries.
1 in 5 people in Togo is Muslim. The faith has gained followers in the country over the last decade. Islamic schools with lessons in Arabic are opening nationwide.
We want Wahhabi Islam to develop. Some individuals might be radical. We will bring them back to their senses.
Togo is French-speaking, however, French is not taught in the school here, meaning the 650 students will gain high school diplomas valid solely for entry to universities in Arab countries.
Today you have Franco-Arabic schools. That is not where the danger lies. It is in the schools managed by little-known NGOs. They are the ones teaching extremism.
There are thought to be a few dozen Islamic extremists in Togo. Some are supported by Lebanon's Hezbollah, considered a terrorist group by the US and EU.
Hezbollah started helping us not long ago. They came to boost our courage, to suggest some projects that will soon be realized. They help build hospitals and Quranic schools. All that can help to promote Shia Islam.
This young man says Ben Laden is his hero.
If our imam asks us to join the holy war, I will.
The majority of imams in Togo have, in recent weeks, called on all Muslim clerics to sever ties with extremist groups.
Well, that wraps up African News from me for tonight, but do stay with us. Short break now, and we'll be bringing you more news and headlines from around the world. Take care.